The red and blue lights painted my driveway like a crime scene. Two police cruisers sat parked in front of my house, their engines still running. Karen stood there in her bathrobe, pointing at my backyard with the confidence of someone who thought she had just won the lottery. "Officer, I demand you shut this illegal gathering down immediately," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I watched from my porch as 30 of my guests stood frozen on my lawn. Men and women in casual clothes, some still holding plates of barbecue, all staring at the unfolding drama. The officers stepped out of their cars, their faces professional but puzzled as they surveyed the scene. Karen had no idea what she had just walked into. She had no idea who these people were. And she definitely had no idea that she was about to experience the most humiliating moment of her entire life. 3 months of planning had led to this moment. I stood in my backyard, adjusting the string lights one final time as the late afternoon sun cast everything in golden light. Tonight was not just any barbecue. Tonight was Police Chief Martinez's retirement party. The man had given 30 years of his life to our community, 30 years of serving and protecting, of being the kind of leader who actually cared about the people he swore to defend. More than that, he had been there for me when I needed him most. 5 years ago, when my house was broken into and my family felt unsafe in our own home, Chief Martinez did not just file a report and move on. He personally checked on us every week until we felt secure again. I wanted this evening to be perfect for him. The tables were arranged perfectly across my lawn, each one covered with crisp white tablecloths, mason jars filled with wildflowers, and small American flags as centerpieces. The smell of slow-cooked brisket filled the air, mixing with the sweet scent of my wife's famous peach cobbler cooling on the kitchen windowsill. My neighbor across the street, Karen, stood at her front window. Her curtains were pulled back just enough for me to see her disapproving silhouette. She had been watching my preparations for weeks, her arms crossed, her face twisted in that permanent scowl she wore whenever she looked at my property. Karen and I had never been friends, but we had never been enemies either. She kept to herself, maintained her perfectly manicured lawn, and generally acted like she owned the entire neighborhood. I had learned to ignore her judgmental stares and passive-aggressive comments about property values and appropriate behavior. The first guests began arriving at 5 o'clock sharp. Off-duty police officers, city council members, and community leaders who had worked alongside Chief Martinez throughout his career. I watched them park along the street, their faces lighting up as they saw the decorations and smelled the food. Detective Sarah Chen was the first to arrive. She had worked under Chief Martinez for 15 years and considered him a mentor. Behind her came Captain Rodriguez, Sergeant Thompson, and a dozen other officers who had served with honor under the chief's leadership. "You outdid yourself," Detective Chen said, shaking my hand as she surveyed the setup. "The chief is going to love this." I felt a surge of pride as more guests arrived. These were good people, dedicated public servants who had earned the right to celebrate their leader's distinguished career. The atmosphere was warm and respectful, filled with the kind of conversation that comes from people who have shared important work together. As the sun began to set, I lit the tiki torches around the perimeter of my yard. The string lights cast dancing shadows across the lawn, creating the perfect ambience for an evening of celebration and gratitude. Everything was exactly as I had envisioned it. Chief Martinez arrived at 6:30, his wife Rosa by his side. The crowd erupted in applause as he walked through my gate, his face breaking into the wide smile that had made him beloved throughout the community. He wore his dress uniform one final time, the badges and decorations catching the light as he moved through the crowd, shaking hands and embracing colleagues. I had never felt more honored to host an event in my life. At 7:15, just as Chief Martinez was beginning to share stories about his early days on the force, Karen exploded out of her front door like a woman possessed. She stormed across the street in her pink bathrobe and fuzzy slippers, her hair in curlers, her face red with indignation. Every step she took was filled with the kind of righteous anger that comes from someone who believes they have been personally wronged by the universe. "Excuse me," she shouted, her voice cutting through the gentle conversation like a fire alarm. "Excuse me, I need to speak with the homeowner immediately." The entire party fell silent. 30 conversations stopped mid-sentence as every head turned to watch Karen march into my backyard uninvited. She planted herself in the middle of my lawn like she owned it, her hands on her hips, her eyes blazing with fury. "I am Karen Mitchell from across the street," she announced, as if her name carried some kind of legal authority. "And I am here to inform you that this gathering is in direct violation of multiple city ordinances and neighborhood association rules." I walked over to her, my heart pounding with embarrassment and anger. My honored guests were watching this woman make a scene at what should have been a dignified celebration. "Karen, this is a private party on my own property," I said, keeping my voice as calm as possible. "We are well within our rights to have guests over for dinner." "Do not lecture me about rights," she snapped, her finger jabbing in my direction. "I have been monitoring this situation for weeks. You have turned this neighborhood into a circus with your excessive decorations, your loud music, and now this inappropriate gathering of questionable individuals." Detective Chen stepped forward, her expression professional but clearly offended. "Ma'am, I think there might be some misunderstanding here." Karen whirled around to face her, her bathrobe spinning dramatically. "And who exactly are you to speak to me? Another one of his party guests who thinks they can do whatever they want in a respectable neighborhood." The insult hit Detective Chen like a physical blow. This was a woman who had dedicated her life to protecting people like Karen, who had risked her safety countless times to keep the community safe. To be dismissed as a questionable individual was more than she could bear. "I am Detective Sarah Chen with the City Police Department," she said, her voice steady but cold. "And I would suggest you reconsider your approach to this situation." Karen laughed, a harsh sound that made everyone within earshot wince. "Oh, so now you are claiming to be a police officer. How convenient. I suppose everyone at this party is going to claim they are some kind of authority figure." The crowd of actual authority figures exchanged glances. Captain Rodriguez's jaw tightened. Sergeant Thompson's hands clenched into fists. These were people who had earned their positions through years of service and sacrifice, and they were being mocked by a woman in curlers and a bathrobe. "Karen, please," I said, trying to de-escalate the situation. "This is a retirement party for a respected member of our community. We are not causing any disturbance, and we are certainly not violating any ordinances." "Retirement party," she scoffed. "You expect me to believe that this collection of troublemakers is here for a retirement party? Look at them. They look like they are planning some kind of criminal activity." The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. She was standing in the middle of a gathering of police officers, calling them criminals. But Karen was too blinded by her own sense of righteousness to see what was right in front of her. "I am giving you exactly 10 minutes to send these people home and clean up this mess," she declared, pulling out her phone and checking the time. "If you do not comply, I will be forced to call the proper authorities to handle this situation." Chief Martinez had been watching the entire exchange with the calm patience of a man who had dealt with difficult people for 3 decades. He stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention from everyone except Karen. "Ma'am, I think if you would just allow us to explain." "I do not want to hear any explanations from you or anyone else," Karen interrupted, not even bothering to look at him. "I want these people gone, and I want them gone now. This neighborhood has standards, and I will not allow them to be compromised by people who think they are above the law." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Karen had just accused a gathering of law enforcement professionals of being above the law. The irony was about to become very, very real. Karen raised her phone like a weapon, her finger hovering over the emergency dial. The gesture was theatrical, designed to intimidate and control. She had played this card before, I realized. This was her go-to move when she wanted to get her way. "I am calling 911 right now," she announced, her voice filled with the satisfaction of someone who believed they held all the power. "We will see how quickly your little party ends when the police arrive." She pressed the numbers with exaggerated precision, making sure everyone could see her taking action. The phone rang twice before the emergency dispatcher answered. 911, what is your emergency?" Karen's entire demeanor changed. Her voice became high-pitched and frantic, like she was reporting a major crime in progress. "Yes, I need police assistance immediately. I am at 1247 Maple Street, and there is a large, illegal gathering taking place that is disturbing the peace and violating multiple city ordinances." I watched my guests as they listened to Karen's performance. Some looked shocked, others looked amused, but all of them understood the irony of what was happening. She was calling the police on the police. "Ma'am, can you describe the nature of the disturbance?" the dispatcher asked. "There are at least 30 people trespassing on private property, playing loud music, and engaging in suspicious activities," Karen continued, her voice getting more dramatic with each word. "The homeowner is being completely uncooperative and refuses to comply with reasonable requests to end this illegal gathering." Detective Chen covered her mouth to hide a smile. Captain Rodriguez shook his head in disbelief. Sergeant Thompson actually chuckled out loud, which earned him a furious glare from Karen. "Officers are being dispatched to your location," the dispatcher said. "Please remain calm and stay on the line." Karen hung up with a triumphant smile. "There," she said, sliding the phone back into her bathrobe pocket. "Now we will see who has the real authority in this neighborhood." The silence that followed was deafening. 30 people stood frozen in my backyard, watching a woman who had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She had no idea that she was surrounded by the very people she had just called to arrest. "You know what?" I said, my voice calm but firm. "You are absolutely right, Karen. Let the police handle this. Let them come and sort out exactly what kind of gathering this is." Something in my tone must have registered because Karen's confident expression flickered for just a moment. But her arrogance quickly returned, and she crossed her arms with satisfaction. "Finally, some common sense," she said. "When the officers arrive, they will see exactly what kind of chaos you have created in this neighborhood. They will shut this down immediately, and hopefully, you will learn a valuable lesson about respecting your neighbors." Chief Martinez stepped closer to where Karen stood, his presence commanding even in casual clothes. "Ma'am, before the officers arrive, perhaps you would like to reconsider your approach to this situation." Karen barely glanced at him. "I do not need to reconsider anything. I know exactly what I am doing, and I know exactly what kind of people you are. The police will sort this out quickly." The words were barely out of her mouth when we heard the first siren in the distance. Two police cruisers were responding to her call, their emergency lights already visible as they turned onto our street. Karen's face lit up with vindication. "Here they come," she said, smoothing down her bathrobe like she was preparing for a victory parade. "Now you will all learn what happens when you disrespect a neighborhood and its rules." I looked at Chief Martinez, who simply nodded and stepped back into the crowd. The man had spent 30 years dealing with situations like this, and he knew exactly how to handle what was about to unfold. The sirens grew louder, and the flashing lights painted the evening sky in red and blue. Karen straightened her shoulders and prepared to meet her cavalry, completely unaware that she was about to face the most embarrassing moment of her entire life. The two police cruisers pulled up to the curb with their emergency lights flashing, transforming our quiet suburban street into something that looked like a crime scene. The neighbors who had been watching from their windows now came out onto their porches, drawn by the spectacle of police cars and the promise of neighborhood drama. Karen practically ran to meet the officers as they stepped out of their vehicles. Officer Blake, a young patrolman I recognized from community events, emerged from the first car, followed by Officer Martinez, no relation to the chief, from the second cruiser. "Officers, thank goodness you are here," Karen began, her voice breathless with excitement. "I am the one who called. I am Karen Mitchell, and I live right across the street. This homeowner is hosting an illegal gathering that is completely out of control." Officer Blake pulled out his notepad, his expression professional but patient. "Ma'am, what exactly is the nature of the disturbance?" Karen launched into her prepared speech, her words tumbling out in a rush of accusations and demands. "There are at least 30 people trespassing on this property, engaging in loud and disruptive behavior, violating noise ordinances, and completely disregarding the rules of this neighborhood. I have asked them repeatedly to disperse, but they have been completely uncooperative." As she spoke, both officers scanned the scene behind her. What they saw was a well-organized backyard gathering with string lights, neatly arranged tables, and a group of well-dressed adults standing quietly on the lawn. There was no loud music, no rowdy behavior, no signs of the chaos Karen was describing. "I see," Officer Blake said, his tone carefully neutral. "And what specific laws do you believe are being violated?" Karen's confidence soared. Here was an officer who was taking her seriously, asking the right questions, treating her like the concerned citizen she knew herself to be. "Noise ordinances, public gathering permits, probably fire safety violations with all those decorations," she said, waving her hand toward my backyard. "Not to mention the suspicious nature of this crowd. I have been watching them for hours, and I can tell you that these are not the kind of people who belong in a neighborhood like this." Officer Martinez stepped forward, his expression shifting slightly as he got a better look at the gathering. His eyes moved across the crowd, and I could see the moment recognition dawned on his face. He had just spotted several of his colleagues and supervisors standing in my backyard. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "have you spoken with the homeowner about the nature of this gathering?" Karen huffed with frustration. "Of course I have. He claims it is some kind of retirement party, but look at these people. Do they look like they are here for a retirement party? They look like they are planning some kind of criminal activity." Officer Blake followed his partner's gaze toward the crowd, and his expression changed as well. His notepad lowered slightly as he recognized Detective Chen, who had been his training officer just 2 years earlier. Then he spotted Captain Rodriguez, who had promoted him to his current position. "Criminal activity," Officer Martinez repeated, his voice carefully controlled. "Absolutely," Karen said, her voice rising with conviction. "I have lived in this neighborhood for 15 years, and I know suspicious behavior when I see it. These people are up to no good, and I demand that you arrest them immediately." The two officers exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. They were professional enough to maintain their composure, but I could see the struggle in their faces as they processed what Karen was asking them to do. "Ma'am, before we take any action, we need to speak with the homeowner and assess the situation properly," Officer Blake said, his voice still professional but with a slight edge that Karen completely missed. "Assessment." Karen's voice reached a new pitch of indignation. "What is there to assess? I have told you everything you need to know. These people are disturbing the peace, violating city ordinances, and engaging in suspicious behavior. Your job is to arrest them, not to stand here asking questions." Officer Martinez looked past Karen toward the crowd, his eyes settling on Chief Martinez, who stood calmly among the other guests. The young officer's face went pale as he realized who he was looking at. "Ma'am," he said, his voice suddenly very quiet, "I think you might want to reconsider your position on this matter." But Karen was too far gone to hear the warning in his voice. She was riding the wave of her own righteous anger, convinced that she was about to witness the triumph of justice and neighborhood order. "I will not reconsider anything," she declared. "I want these criminals arrested, and I want them arrested right now." The word criminals hung in the air like a challenge. Karen had just called the chief of police and half of his department criminals. The irony was about to become very, very real. Chief Martinez stepped forward from the crowd, his presence commanding immediate attention from everyone except Karen, who was still focused on lecturing the two officers about their duty to arrest criminals. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man who had spent 30 years in law enforcement, his dress uniform catching the light from the string lights as he approached the group. The badges and decorations on his chest told the story of a distinguished career, but Karen was too busy talking to notice. "Officers," the chief said, his voice calm but carrying the unmistakable tone of authority that comes from 3 decades of command. Both patrolmen immediately straightened, their entire posture shifting as they recognized their superior. Officer Blake's notepad fell to his side, and Officer Martinez took an unconscious step backward. "Chief Martinez," Officer Blake said, his voice filled with respect and more than a little embarrassment. "Sir, we were responding to a complaint about a disturbance." Karen's head snapped around, her eyes widening as she took in the chief's uniform for the first time. The color began to drain from her face as she processed what she was seeing. "Good evening, officers," Chief Martinez said, his tone professional but warm. "I believe there may have been some confusion about the nature of this gathering." "Confusion." Karen's voice came out as a squeak, but she quickly recovered, her stubbornness overriding her growing embarrassment. "There is no confusion. This is an illegal gathering, and I do not care if one of them is wearing a costume. I want them arrested." The silence that followed was deafening. Officer Martinez looked like he wanted to crawl under a rock. Officer Blake's face had gone completely white. The guests in my backyard stood frozen, watching Karen dig her hole deeper with every word. "Ma'am," Chief Martinez said, his voice still calm but with an edge that made everyone pay attention, "I am Chief Martinez of the City Police Department. This gathering is a retirement party being held in my honor after 30 years of service to this community." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Her eyes darted between the chief's uniform and the two officers, who were now standing at attention, despite the informal setting. That is impossible," she stammered. "You cannot be the police chief. The police chief would never associate with people like this." "People like what exactly?" Detective Chen stepped forward, her voice cold as ice. "Would you like to explain what you mean by people like this?" Karen's eyes swept across the crowd again, and for the first time she seemed to really see them. The confident posture, the alert expressions, the way they carried themselves with quiet authority. These were not the criminals she had imagined. I just meant," she began, but the words died in her throat as more members of the gathering stepped forward. "I am Captain Rodriguez," said a man in a polo shirt and khakis. "I have served under Chief Martinez for 20 years. "Sergeant Thompson," said a woman holding a plate of barbecue, 15 years on the force. "Detective Williams, Detective Park, Officer Johnson," came the voices from the crowd as more and more law enforcement professionals identified themselves. Karen's bathrobe suddenly felt very thin, and her curlers seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. She looked around desperately, as if searching for an escape route that did not exist. "This is not possible," she whispered, but her voice carried no conviction. The evidence was overwhelming, and even Karen could not deny what was standing right in front of her. Chief Martinez stepped closer, his presence filling the space between them. "Ma'am, you called 911 to report a gathering of criminals. You demanded that these officers arrest their own colleagues, their supervisors, and their chief. You have accused dedicated public servants of suspicious behavior and criminal activity." Each word landed like a hammer blow. Karen's face had gone from red to white to a sickly shade of green as the full magnitude of her mistake became clear. I did not know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought, I assumed." "You assumed," Chief Martinez repeated, his voice carrying the weight of disappointment that was somehow worse than anger. "You assumed that a gathering of people enjoying a barbecue in their neighbor's backyard must be criminal activity. You assumed that people who look different from you or dress differently from you must be up to no good." The crowd of officers and city officials watched in silence as their chief delivered a masterclass in professional dignity. This was not about humiliation or revenge. This was about education and accountability. "Ma'am, I have spent 30 years protecting this community," he continued. "I have worked with men and women who risk their lives every day to keep people like you safe. And tonight, you have accused every one of them of being criminals based on nothing more than your own assumptions and prejudices." Karen's shoulders sagged as the full weight of her actions settled on her. She had not just embarrassed herself. She had insulted and degraded people who had dedicated their lives to public service. "I am sorry," she whispered, but the words felt small and inadequate in the face of what she had done. "Sorry is a good start," Chief Martinez said, his voice softening slightly. "But sorry is not enough. You owe an apology to every person here, and more importantly, you owe it to yourself to examine why you made the assumptions you made." The two responding officers stood frozen, unsure of how to proceed. They had come to arrest criminals and instead found themselves witnessing their chief's retirement party being disrupted by a woman in a bathrobe. "Officers," Chief Martinez said, addressing the patrolmen, "I believe this situation has been resolved. There are no violations here, no disturbances, and no criminal activity. Just a community gathering to celebrate public service." "Yes, sir," both officers said in unison, their relief evident. Karen stood in the middle of my lawn, surrounded by the very people she had tried to have arrested, wearing nothing but a bathrobe and the crushing weight of her own humiliation. Karen's retreat across the street was a study in complete defeat. Her fuzzy slippers shuffled against the pavement as she made her way back to her house. The pink bathrobe that had seemed so righteous minutes earlier now looking like a flag of surrender. She never once looked back. The silence that followed her departure was heavy with the weight of what everyone had just witnessed. 30 people stood in my backyard, processing the most spectacular display of misplaced confidence and prejudice any of us had ever seen. "Well," Detective Chen said, breaking the silence, "that was certainly educational." A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the crowd. The tension began to ease as people realized that the drama was over and the evening could return to its original purpose. Chief Martinez turned to the two officers who were still standing somewhat awkwardly by the gate. "Officers, I apologize that you had to respond to this situation. I know it put you in a difficult position." "No need to apologize, sir," Officer Blake said, his professionalism returning now that the immediate crisis had passed. "We are just glad we could help clarify the situation." "Would you like to stay for a while?" I asked, stepping forward. "We have plenty of food, and you are welcome to join us in celebrating the chief's retirement." Both officers looked to their superior, who nodded with a smile. "I think that would be appropriate if you are not needed elsewhere." "Our shift supervisor said we could take our time with this call," Officer Martinez said, and for the first time that evening he smiled. I think he knew exactly what we were walking into. As the officers parked their cruisers and joined the gathering, the conversation gradually returned to its original tone. But there was a new energy in the air, a sense of camaraderie that had been forged by the shared experience of witnessing Karen's spectacular downfall. "I have to say," Captain Rodriguez said, raising his glass of iced tea, "in 20 years of law enforcement, I have never been called a criminal by someone in a bathrobe and curlers." "It was definitely a first for me too," Sergeant Thompson added, and the laughter that followed was genuine and therapeutic. Chief Martinez found me near the grill, where I was trying to process what had just happened to my carefully planned evening. "I am sorry about that," I said, shaking my head. "I had no idea she would react that way. I just wanted tonight to be perfect for your retirement." "Son," the chief said, placing a hand on my shoulder, "tonight was perfect. Not despite what happened, but because of it. You gave me and everyone here a reminder of why we do this job." I looked at him confused. "How do you mean?" "We protect people like Karen too," he said, his voice thoughtful. "Even when they do not understand what we do, even when they assume the worst about us, even when they treat us with disrespect and suspicion, we still serve them because that is what the badge means." The wisdom in his words hit me like a revelation. This was not just about Karen's embarrassment or the irony of the situation. It was about the character of the people who had chosen to dedicate their lives to public service. "Besides," Chief Martinez added with a grin, "this is going to be one hell of a story to tell at future gatherings." As the evening progressed, the incident with Karen became a bonding experience for everyone present. Stories were shared about difficult encounters with the public, about the challenges of serving people who sometimes saw law enforcement as the enemy rather than protectors. But there was no bitterness in these stories, no anger or resentment. These were people who understood that their job was bigger than any individual interaction, more important than any personal slight. The party continued until well past 10 o'clock, with conversations flowing freely and laughter echoing across the neighborhood. Karen's house remained dark and silent, her curtains drawn tight against the world she had so spectacularly misjudged. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood dynamics shifted in ways both subtle and profound. Karen's house remained unusually quiet, her daily routine of patrolling the street and monitoring everyone's activities conspicuously absent. I would see her occasionally, usually rushing from her car to her front door, her eyes fixed firmly on the ground. The woman who had once made it her business to know everyone's affairs now seemed determined to become invisible. The story of that evening spread through the community like wildfire, not because I told it, but because 30 witnesses had experienced something they would never forget. Word traveled through the police department, city hall, and the broader community about the woman who had called the cops on the cops. My relationship with my other neighbors improved dramatically. People who had previously offered only polite waves now stopped to chat, to ask about my family, to share their own stories about dealing with difficult neighbors. The incident had revealed something important about character, both Karen's and my own. Chief Martinez kept in touch after his retirement, occasionally stopping by for coffee and conversation. During one of these visits, he shared something that stuck with me. "You know," he said, sitting on my back porch where the whole drama had unfolded, "Karen did everyone a favor that night." I looked at him puzzled. "How do you figure that?" "She showed everyone who we really are," he said simply. "Not the uniforms or the badges or the titles, but the people underneath. She gave us a chance to demonstrate grace under pressure, to show that we are exactly who we claim to be." I thought about that conversation often in the months that followed. The chief was right. Karen's assumptions and prejudices had created a situation that revealed character in ways that normal circumstances never could. The barbecue had become legendary, not just for the food or the company, but for the lesson it taught about assumptions, community, and the power of truth to cut through ignorance. My backyard returned to its normal quiet state, but it carried the memory of that evening like a badge of honor. The string lights still hung from the trees, a reminder of the night when justice was served not through revenge or retaliation, but through simple truth and dignity. Karen eventually moved away, about 6 months later. The for sale sign appeared in her yard without fanfare, and she left the neighborhood as quietly as she had arrived. I heard from a mutual neighbor that she had decided she needed a fresh start somewhere else. I never spoke to her again after that night, but I often thought about her, not with anger or satisfaction, but with something closer to pity. She had lived so long in fear and suspicion that she had forgotten how to see the good in people. The final lesson of that evening was not about Karen's humiliation or my vindication. It was about the importance of looking beyond assumptions, of giving people the benefit of the doubt, and of remembering that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people reveal their true character. In the end, the barbecue achieved something far more important than just honoring Chief Martinez's retirement. It became a testament to the power of truth, dignity, and community to triumph over ignorance and prejudice.